Revenge films.
My name is Sarah. I live with my husband Michael and our son Thomas, who's in preschool right now. I married Michael after 2 years of dating him, and at the time I didn't realize it when we were only dating, but I found out after we got married that he had quite the Oedipus complex and was a total mama's boy. Michael always wanted to go back to his parents' house, so from time to time our family goes over to visit his parents. But to be honest, I was pretty troubled by my relationship with my mother-in-law. Even if I'm trying to flatter her, I can't say that my mother-in-law was good at cooking, but she loves cooking and she would always cook a homemade meal for us. However, it always tasted horrible, and my husband would always come up with some kind of excuse not to eat it. And so, it became the norm for me to be the only one that was forced to eat these terrible food. I simply didn't want to anger my mother-in-law, so I would force myself to eat it, but because she used all kinds of random ingredients in the food, I would often get a stomachache after. Because my son was still young, even if he didn't eat it, he wasn't particularly yelled at for it, and so we just pretended like he was a picky eater so that we could avoid having him eat this mystery food. One day when we went over to Michael's family's house, his mother wasn't home. Because of that, I was going to be making lunch for the day, and my husband and my son requested that I make ramen. Ramen was actually my mother-in-law's specialty dish, and she would often make the broth out of fish and spend hours on her ramen. The ramen that I made was a very simple and classic style ramen, and everyone said it was delicious and licked their bowls clean. That was when my father-in-law said,
"You can't even compare this to my wife's tasteless ramen."
But right at that time, my mother-in-law had just come home and walked into the living room. "I can't believe you would speak about me like that when I'm not here. That's awful!" And she was furious, and they started to get into a fight. "Ma'am, please calm down. It's okay." "You shut up! First of all, this is all your fault for making ramen in the first place. I can't believe you would let your family eat the same thing as instant noodles. You're a failure as a wife."
Now that I think about it, I always thought that Sarah's cooking tasted kind of like instant food.
What? Instead of trying to calm down his mother who was yelling at me, instead my husband took her side and came after me, and that was infuriating. I felt really bad that I angered my mother-in-law, and when we got home, I was feeling really upset about it. But that was when my husband said the most unbelievable thing.
Hey, what do you think that my mom is?
What do you mean?
It might be true that my mom's cooking is tasteless, but I can't believe you made ramen in her house. Almost like you did it on purpose.
I only made ramen because you and Thomas insisted that's what you wanted to eat for lunch.
I don't remember that, but I've been thinking this for a while now. But if you don't act like my mom's cooking is delicious, then I feel so bad for her. You better be careful from the next time.
Even though he would always run away from cooking and only force me to eat his own mother's tasteless cooking, I couldn't believe that he was even complaining to me about it. I was irritated, and I was about to reach the peak of my patience that I'd been holding in until then. A few days later, I got a call from my mother-in-law saying that she received vegetables from a friend and that she wanted to share some with us. So Michael, Thomas, and I headed over to their house on the weekend. When we arrived, Michael's mother was waiting for us with a snarky look on her face and 3 bowls of ramen prepared. I saw Michael try to run away, but I grabbed his arm, and that day my husband was going to be eating his mother's food with me for the first time in a long time. On the dining room table, there were 2 large bowls of ramen for Michael and me, and for Thomas there was a child-sized bowl as well as small rice balls and sausages for him. Even though I angered her the last time that we were there, she still prepared food for us that I know must have taken her hours to make. With my mother-in-law's kindness right in front of me, for some reason, I started to feel some kind of guilt towards her. My husband seemed terrified to eat his ramen, and after taking just 1 bite out of it, he got up out of his seat without saying a word and disappeared from the dining room. Even though the ramen was tasteless and terrible, I said over and over again that it was delicious and forced myself to finish it. Perhaps because I was forcing myself and trying to say that it was good, the ramen tasted even worse than ever. Even though the ramen was usually fishy and barely had any flavor, the ramen today seemed like it had a bitterness in it. "Oh dear, you still have some soup left. You need to drink all of it." "I'm sorry, I'm very full, so..." "You're the worst kind of leftovers. Somebody made a cooked meal for you. Are you seriously going to waste this cooking that took me hours to make? Shut your mouth and finish all of it." As she said that, my mother-in-law tried to force me to have the remainder of the ramen soup. Just thinking about drinking the rest of this tasteless soup, I started to get nauseous, and I couldn't help but to look away from my bowl of ramen. But then, when I wasn't looking away, Thomas had reached for my bowl and was about to drink it for me. However, right at that moment, my mother-in-law screamed, "No!" Even though she always tries to get Thomas to eat her food, I thought it was strange that she would try to stop him. After that moment, I felt something shift in my body. I was suddenly overwhelmed with stomach pain. I thought that something was wrong with me when I heard my husband yell from the kitchen.
Hey, Mom! Where's your first aid kit? Ah, there it is. There it is. I have a really bad headache, so I'm gonna have some painkillers.
You can't take that medicine! Even though my mother-in-law tried to stop him by yelling to the kitchen, it was in vain because my husband had already drank the mystery medicine. And then I could see that Michael was starting to experience extreme stomach pain like me.
My stomach! Is this because of this medicine?
Just hurry up and get to the toilet, now! I thought it was suspicious, and when I tried to confront my mother-in-law about it, she insisted that she didn't know anything at all, and so I grabbed the medicine that my husband had just drank. My mother-in-law panicked and she tried to snatch it out of my hands, but I managed to at least get the name of the medicine, and I looked it up on my phone. And that medicine was laxatives. Did you mix laxatives into my ramen? No matter how you think about it, that's too awful! Because you refuse to enjoy my cooking. My mother-in-law turned and was angry at me. And as we got into an argument, my father-in-law, who had been out for the afternoon, came home right at that moment, and so I explained the entire situation to him. And then he was furious, and he kicked his wife out of the house on the spot. In the meantime, because of the large amount of laxatives that was mixed into the ramen, I had stomach pains that lasted until the next day. Despite that, my husband was only worried about the fight between his parents, and he didn't even seem the slightest bit worried about my health or well-being. And that was when I started to think seriously about getting a divorce from Michael. After that, because I was so traumatized from the pain I felt from eating ramen with laxatives mixed into it, I stopped going to Michael's house with him, and I was estranged from my mother-in-law. It seemed that my father-in-law was troubled for many years by his wife's terrible cooking, and perhaps because he was finally freed from that stress, he must have been really happy. Because he used to be extremely skinny, but it looks like he was finally putting on some weight. In the end, he decided to get a divorce from his wife. A few days after that, I got a phone call from my mother-in-law, and she tried to apologize to me. And then she tried to ask me to help her convince her husband not to get a divorce. But I could understand very well just how much my father-in-law had been suffering until now. I told her that there was no way I could trust somebody like her that would secretly put laxatives into my food like that, and so I refused. Because my husband was such a mama's boy, I already predicted that he would become furious if he found out that I went against his mother's wishes. However, I couldn't not tell him what happened, so when he came from work that day, I explained the situation. I told him exactly how the phone call went, and just as I expected, Michael threw a tantrum.
You married into this family, and yet you're going to deny a flavor that my mom asked you? What the hell are you thinking? Help her and make my parents get back together! If my parents actually get divorced, then it's gonna be all your fault! And if that happens, then I'm going to be divorcing you!
As soon as I heard his words, I felt something step inside of me, and I exploded and unloaded everything onto him. Is that so? Well then, let's get a divorce. Not only was I forced to eat such tasteless cooking, as a cherry on top, she mixed laxatives into my food without me knowing. You know it's a crime to put laxative into somebody's foods without their knowledge. You know that, right?
Stop treating my mom like she's a criminal!
I'm definitely not going to be the one again between your parents. Let's get a divorce.
Obviously, there's no way you could actually do that. If you're going to apologize, now's your chance!
I already decided that we're going to get a divorce. I've had enough of a mama's boy like you. When my husband realized that I was being serious about my intention of getting divorced, he immediately started to panic. However, I had already decided and it was set in stone. Michael knew more than anybody how much I suffered from the laxatives, yet he was taking his mother's side. And not only that, but he was attacking me, and I didn't need a husband like that anymore. On the next day, I had already prepared divorce papers and actually put them in front of him. And Michael apologized to me multiple times. However, I didn't accept any of them. And then, I told him that I was thinking about suing his mother for assault. I checked with the lawyer, and putting laxatives into somebody's food without their knowledge and forcing them to eat it is a form of assault. And so, I decided to sue your mom for it.
You're joking, right? Stop that! My mom already apologized and said that she feels bad about it, so let it go!
Do you have any idea how much pain I was in for days?
No way!
My husband tried to get out of the divorce until the very end, but eventually he realized that I wasn't going to budge, and the divorce went through. After that, because he told me just how regretful his mother was, I did think twice about suing her. In return for not pressing charges, I made Michael promise that he would never come near me or Thomas ever again. However, he refused to pay child support fees, so in the end I had to hire a lawyer to go through with the divorce, and I was finally able to get his legal agreement to pay child support fees every month. Perhaps after my son and I moved out of the house, he became lonely, and he came to me over and over again, crying and apologizing. But of course I had no intention of getting back together with him. I gave him permission to see Thomas once a month, and that was it. As for my former mother-in-law, I heard that she also tried everything that she could to get out of her divorce. But in the end, she wasn't able to convince her husband not to leave, and they did get divorced. She had to move into a small apartment by herself and live alone. Michael then turned the blame for his own divorce on his mother, and because he resented her for it, they became estranged. My mother-in-law had nobody left on her side and was going to be stuck living the rest of her elderly life alone.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.